welcome to Got the Runs, your weekly catch-up show where we cover all things Australia, all things that we've witnessed here on the Ashes Tour, and things that maybe, get lost in translation on the way back to the UK or wherever you're watching from. This will represent a much more informal chat and more of a dialogue centred around the badgers out there, me, you, and everyone in between. And where better to kick off than the boys arriving in Perth and the first test. So, as we just mentioned, the Ashes started in Perth because apparently the ICC decided the only thing England needed more was bounce. Now, after Stokes won the toss, the general sort of reception in the crowd was that after Nasser's glaring mishap of the early noughties, no England captain in the first test would ever bowl first. So it felt like that merged with the fact that, the Bazball tactics and, the fact that this is a drop-in pitch, the first Ashes test happening at the Optus, that batting was the conservative option, which in the Bazball, Stokes-McCullum eras, probably more unheard of than anything else. But the reception, like I said, in the crowd was largely optimistic. As we saw the boys going out there, it was clear that, an Australian side depleted of Cummins and Hazelwood, that they were to be had. Scott Boland, a lot of people were regarding as he's an MCG bully, and on a pitch like that, it really showed in those sort of early sort of segments of play that Australia were down a few bowlers. Look, Stark's whole innings, to be honest, was absolutely exceptional, and he put the ball where he needed to put the ball, which is a really ominous sign going into the pink ball at Brisbane. But back to Perth, the partnership, did we expect it to last a long time? You talk about those talking points, and you say that first ball of the innings, the first ball of the Ashes, whatever it might be, and you think of it from that perspective, and Rory Burns 4 years ago, first ball to Stark, and you think about the Crawley drive for the covers first ball. It was very much on a knife's edge, and as it turned out, sixth ball into the innings, Crawley cleaned up, and that's the first wicket to fall. Did we think that was a sign of things to come? Probably, but I think there was a lot of the hubbub. We were in and amongst a bit of a mixed crowd, some Australians, some Brits, and I think that there was a general hope that that goes, and from what's next, it's better to come, and Duckett and Pope, they've rebuilt, and I think that follows true to the second innings, but they looked like they wanted to be there. The intent was good, and as that partnership started to blossom, it put us into a better position, and one where I think even the Aussies in the crowd felt that the Crawley was a bygone, and we were building towards a whole day's batting. And just to remind fans out there, the Optus Stadium hosted a test between Australia and India last year, and that followed a very, very similar path to the first day, except the second day was completely different, and we'll get onto that. So that the Duckett and Pope partnership progressed on nicely, and it ticked on, and people were starting to believe that this was the foundations, and as we know, as sort of we get towards the lunch break, a couple of wickets started to fall. I don't think they necessarily were bad shots. I think that this was the fruitiest the deck was going to be throughout the test match, and that really followed true. So as they were tumbling down, we get towards lunch, and we're sat with with 5 or 6 boys in the hutch, and the belief in the crowd was still very much this is a 250 to 300 first day, and we'll bat through to the middle of the second day, and we'll go from there. Obviously, it was that Australia rocked up without Hazelwood, but England rocked up without a functional batting lineup, and that really was the bit where I think, if we're going to talk about it from the perspective of the warm-up game against themselves, and probably the lack of preparation on that side of things, that was something that really smelt foul by the end of the first day. But no one expected it to go down the way that it did. Day one begins, 19 wickets fall. 19. That's not Test cricket. That's a murder mystery. Where's Miss Marple? We scrape our way towards 172, but Australia, similarly, with a batting lineup where I think you could argue there's a few players in their last series for the country. They didn't show up either. In the crowd watching that, you're talking about, was there a standout moment? And the speed merchants of Archer Wood were exceptional. Sitting from side on, even if we were in the nosebleeds, you could really get the sense that something special was happening. And Wood was clocking 151, 152, 153 clicks, and Archer was bowling spells like the wickets that he got were. It was just raw pace. It was everything that this sort of fast ball speed merchants have been sort of honed for and rested for and rotated for, and it felt like that was really clicking. And as mentioned, the 19 wickets as they fell, Stokes picked up his 5. The 5 that he picked up were more indicative, I think, of a man with a point to prove, and it showed. And the reception in the crowd, both from the Aussies and from the English fans, was really, really uplifting and powerful. It believed that really at the point of the end of the first day that the stalemate had been reached. Almost a mulligan has been given to both. A breakfast ball off the first tee, that probably resonates more with the England players. That's a golf reference for anybody who isn't quite there. But it's, it felt a bit like a passer parcel at a kid's birthday party. And day 2 started, and England thought, could we collapse faster? And yes, they could. So from 172 in the first to 164 in the second day. Look, it was, the net lead was 109 for 1 after that first session. Pope and Duckett again looked good. They looked really good. I mean, especially Pope for that first 30 runs that he scored. His box was exactly where he wanted it to be. It's in front of the stumps. He made the bowlers bowl to him. But sadly, like a ship a sail, the anchor went missing, and he just started to drift out, and you could just see it coming. Duckett got a vicious delivery actually just before the lunch break, and he looked shaken from that. Just one that came up and clipped him on the arm, and he's a hard little lad, and I think that him getting through to lunch, both of them getting through to lunch, was a great sign. But also, as soon as the second session happened, it was just absolute mania. There was a weird sort of almost silence in the crowd where people didn't really know what was going on. Like, there was the hubbub of excitement of Ashes cricket had completely dissipated, and actually it was more of a, what in the sort of house of horrors is happening. People were, lambasting the pitch, and people were lambasting the fact that Perth, or the West Test, I should say, was this first test of an Ashes summer. But the wickets were absolutely abysmal. It wasn't close to cricket as you know it. It was cricket as you hope never to see it. I mean, the traps that Australia were setting, they weren't complex, Alan Turing type events. These were like leading a bunny out to its eventual demise, and a couple that stick along the memory. Root. I was listening to the coverage on the earpiece, and Darren Lehman said, this is going to be Root's series. This is going to be where he scores 100. He looks absolutely rock solid, and for 9 runs he did. But I think it was 3 wickets falling for no runs, or 4 falling for 1 run, whatever it was. It was just really really challenging to watch. The Brook dismissal, third ball driving on the up. I saw a stat somewhere which was like Scott Boland gets 70% of his wickets with the ball on the up to the batsman. Look, I'm a bog standard village cricketer with a BMI of about 77. I'm in no position to tell people how to go about their batting performance, but you average 57, Harry. Yeah, you're better than that, mate. And it was the sort of the impetus that we needed to establish with a lead like that, and with the hard work that Duckett and Pope did, to be honest. It just unravelled without any real effort. People will talk, and we'll go on to it about the head innings and the glory that was, those beautiful shots and how he constructed that. But the sort of the momentum that we carried and that we had at 109 for 1 net lead at lunch, it went away quicker than a smoker, after a bad day at work. It was a really challenging watch, and terrible analogies aside, it was something else, and so we speak about the Rook dismissal and the Root dismissal and the Stokes dismissal. Stokes got an absolute snorter. Mitch Starc, I'm not quite sure he calls Stokes his bunny, but I'd say that the matchup for Stokes is not where you want it to be against the left armour over the wicket. But he got a rip snorter, and I think that will stand up in a court of law. The Jamie Smith dismissal, I mean, this was one where it's 22 overs into a test innings, or whatever it is, 25 overs into the second innings. Australia have got a deep fine leg, a deep square leg, and a mid wicket. Doggett and Boland, and they're putting the ball onto his hip. Like any plan against a tail ender or someone you're trying to get out and smoke him on the ropes is one thing. And I know Smith has a very good start to his Test career, and he's a little bit of a happy hooker, but he'll play his shots, and that's why McCullum and Stokes like him. But, and a big Brazilian but, is when you see those people going out. He was walking to the crease at the time they were putting those players out. This isn't a plan that's been, like you say, has gone through the highest of highs. This is the most simplistic method to get a player early in his career, but one who scored 1,000 runs already. One that was just completely, it was awe-inspiring to see what was happening as the plan was in place and the balls were being bowled, and the whole storyline was deciding itself. Sure as anything, Smith tries to play one around his hip, gloves it, half walks, does the whole DRS ins and the outs, and that's one thing which, as funny as it is, like, Crawley going at the start of the second innings, it was a caught and bowled that Starc caught, and then, there was a question whether he grounded it. There was no question in the crowd, everyone knew it was out. With Smith's one, and this is a gripe that I think is just exactly where the DRS system is going, is that, the soft signal's gone, and more emphasis is on the batsman to either stand his ground and to force the umpire off the ground to make a decision. But it didn't check out. That aside, he was on his way, and then you're into the bowlers, and Atkinson and Cast batted brilliantly, and everything that we needed at that stage. Should we expect it from 8, 9, 10? But no, we shouldn't. Absolutely, we should not. But Atkinson played the pull shot beautifully. He played it on the down. He came from up to down. Coach would love that, textbook beautiful. Cast had a few lofty blows, and then shifted away and scooped it, and then obviously got caught behind. And as the lead sort of moved past the 140 to the 190, Joffre comes out, beautiful calypso cover drive, as does Wood, more on the pull for Woods, I should say, and there was the lead, 203 if the memory serves me right. And it was at that point, we were sat against a couple of Aussie lads to the left of us, right down by the Barmy Army, about 3 bays to where we were to our left, and the Australians to the right. And there was this sort of real belief at the moment that happened, that we were at this a juncture in a test match where no one wanted to be, that anywhere you cut it, I should say, that it was a tricky sort of avenue to get behind, but then the Australian innings started, and for all the Weatherald lasted 2 balls in his first innings, but in the second he looked a bit jarred early up. The ball jutted about, and Archer and Wood and Atkinson made it talk a bit, but he did what we didn't do, and he survived the opening spell. You sort of marry that with what was happening at the other end, and Weatherald sort of seemed to sort of leech off the positivity that Head was showing, and that really established an impressive analogue to the bowling that was coming down. When Head came out rather than Labuschagne, it was a positive move. It's a positive move that England would have played, and one that I don't believe that England didn't fully expect. They should have expected it, because in the crowd, like in Australia's first innings, when Labuschagne and Smith were together and they were 3 or 46 balls, whatever it was, that was exactly what our pace bowlers needed to settle. And whether you're bowling 150 or 130, bowlers want to see dots. They want to tie up that end. They want to know who they're bowling to. Fielders don't want to be jutting about from fine leg to square leg to deep cover and all this sort of stuff. And with those two, I'm not going to say stodgy, because at that stage the ball was doing an absolute deal, to be honest. But the impetus shifted. Good bowling, slightly stodgy batting, but with Head coming out in the second innings, it was the gasp in the crowd were pretty fervent, and it really changed the game. And when you sort of look at sort of the way that sort of Head addressed his innings, like he's a batter who sort of sits on the back foot. He's 75% weight on his rear leg, and when you 75% on your rear leg, 25% on your front leg, and you batter with your third leg, you start to appreciate kind of how in control he was of everything that was going on. Noticeable shots. There's some deft touches over the slip cord, and there was pulls, sort of beautiful straight pull shots. Kind of what you'd expect from a front foot player like Ponting, but he was so comfortable playing from where he was playing from. And in that exact moment, look, people are drawing comparisons with Stokes' 2019 heroics at Headingley, and it was like that. It was. I mean, I'm not gonna piss on that parade. It was a seriously well timed counter-attacking innings, and one that honestly, by 20 or 30 runs into it, like we were discussing it around us, and we thought, look, if it's 60 for none, we're in all sorts, and it was like 56 for none. But I thought at 20 or 30 for none that the England bowlers had 32.5 overs to put their feet up. And to be honest, when you add in Atkinson and Carter's batting, like, they had no time at all. Yeah, I mean, there's breaks in play, and there's physios working on overdrive, but these are thoroughbreds who need a day. They need a day and a half. They need whatever they need, and you can't emphasise enough of the Stokes mentioned this shell shocked, and he was shell shocked. He went missing as a captain, and we have been there. And whether that's in a professional setting or a cricketing setting or a social setting, there's sometimes where it's just something happens and you cannot adapt. You cannot cope with it. And it appeared in that moment that Root was calling the shots, and you could see where Brook went. No idea. I mean, I'm immensely disappointed with how he conducted himself, both in his innings and after that. Pope's had the vice armband taken off him, and you expect a man who's now captain his white ball, his country in white ball cricket, to have offered some support. It was nowhere. Root was calling the shots for large parts of that bowling innings, and I go back to sort of certain balls like Bryden Cast is a bowler who I respect a lot. He's got a lot of that sort of Ryan Harris in him, chest on, gives it everything, and you could see how much he's putting it in. And he bowled a few balls in his first over, and they went. And I don't think that changed anything. I don't think that was a momentum swing. I think the momentum swing was right at the start of the second innings, of Australia's second innings, I should say. And when factoring in those sort of moments, he went for a few. Stokes came on, went for 4 fours in his first over, and I think that the writing was on the wall way earlier than people realised. People talk about how right to the end it was it was on the thing. It could be another collapse. And you look at the Australian side. Khawaja's injured, been off the pitch for majority of England's batting innings. You've got the issues surrounding Nathan Lyon. Nathan Lyon didn't bowl in that second innings. He had what I believe was a side strain. Whether he could have batted to any sort of efficacy in that point was very much contested. And all these things sort of factoring back to where we were at, like, would 4 more wickets have changed the game? Could we have run through the tail? I don't think we could have. I really don't. I think it was there's so much potential in the England side, and I am a delusional optimist when it comes to those sort of things. And they've said it in the presses after the match that the game could have gone very differently, and actually, up to the last couple of hours there was a chance to win the game, and they're absolutely right with that. But optimism and positivity and potential, doesn't butter no bread. When it comes down to sort of those clutch moments, you need clutch players, and I don't believe for a second that my unwavering support's gone anywhere. It was more just your dad at the a family at the family barbecue. You've done something really bloody stupid, and I think that's where the blame lies here. And this isn't like an episode of Weakest Link, and I'm not Anne Robinson and asking who's the weakest link with all this sort of stuff. The boys went missing, and they lost the grit and determination that you need to win in Australia. Have I won a test match in Australia? No. I've barely won at a buffet in Australia. But I think when it comes to what has to happen before Brisbane, and look, not sending players to the pink ball warm-up game against the Promises 11, where do I stand on that? I think that could it have given selectors an out to go, look, you can't score runs against a fourth team Australia side, you can't turn up at the Gabba like that. I feel like almost England backed themselves into a corner by not doing what they should have done. Do I expect Root to be sent there as a senior veteran player? No. But Brooke and Crawley, 100%. I'd have sent Smith there. I think Smith's frailty on these sort of pitches is going to be accentuated beyond probably what international player will be seen. They know their plans. You put Cummins back into that team. I think even you look at other players, like if Nisa, for example, plays, if Cummins doesn't play in Brisbane, he's a back of the length player, and sure, you can hope for all certainty that someone can turn it around and they can play an innings that defines them. But that innings that defines them, and it has to be done in a way which protects the rest of their team. And Smith's innings in the first innings at Perth was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was exactly what it needed to be. But there was no pressure at that stage. And pressure makes diamonds, and pressure defines the man. And I think that when I look at, sending players to Canberra, and at this stage, after day one, the Promises 11 scored over 300. We've scored 30 for nothing at close. Matthew Potts has put his hand up with a couple of wickets, and I would argue that probably with Mark Wood's injury, he'll slide back into the team. I think that on a pink deck will be quite tasty. But Josh Tongue and Hull haven't done enough. They would be the X Factor players you would want to replace Wood with, but I just don't believe that both not taking a wicket against a fourth team. Tell me it's not. You got to tell me it's not. So with that and summing up Perth, Head was sublime. He was exactly the antidote to a side that's gone missing, and his cult status in Australia, and my genuinely awful attempt at his moustache pays homage to a man who knew where he needed to be, and he knew where England weren't, and that showed. As we speak about, match being over in 2 days, quickest test match in terms of deliveries bowled or overs bowled in over a century. Is it an anomaly? I pray it is. I think there's a lot of England fans, like the days after the test, we were moping about, and you could see, as I get taken out by whatever the hell that was, you could see the England fans moping about, and you could see the real appetite. Apparently there was 50,000 tickets sold to non-Australian people for the third and fourth days. That's an immense amount of potential that's been wasted. And look, performance aside, whatever, administrators have to look at the opportunity. And I reported on it. Mike McKenna, the former head of the Big Bash, sort of said that you got to put something on. You got to put an exhibition. You got to do something. The Optus is there. People were willing to be there. I'm not just talking about the hospie people who are waiting to have a day on the sesh, but I'm talking about the families. It was a Sunday. it was an opportunity to just put something on, and whether that been Australia taking the initiative or England taking the initiative and going like, you know what, we're hello Mr. Optus, can we possibly come and play? And you just say, look, free entry or whatever it might have been, you leave the concession stalls open. I genuinely think that 7,000 to 10,000 people would have turned up to do something more for the fans and to allow there to be a real, you know, a spectacle within a spectacle. You know, the test match was salivating, and it was, you know, taking. It was something completely else. But there was like I said, there was a real chance to make it more than just that, and define maybe a legacy beyond just, you know, the 2 days of action that we saw. I'm not an administrator. I know that there's lots of things to take into account, but 11 days between, you know, that ending of that and the next test, for some people afforded them a longer holiday. They could see more of Perth. Great. For other people, other people and the teams, it allows this sort of abyss of time where all that happens is people talk, I talk, reporters talk, journalists talk, anyone talks, and fans talk. And you know, as you sat on the metro with the fans, or you're on a day trip with the fans, or you're in the pub with the other fans, everyone was of the same opinion. There wasn't like an absolute swelling of the test or whatever it might have been. It was a genuine confusion of kind of what the hell happened. And I think going forward and developing as a team, I don't know where the end of the line is. Natural succession has to take over at some point. People have to be put out to pasture. That's life. I said at the start of this, this talk, there's a few Australian players who were in their last series, and I believe that, wholeheartedly. But this regime of, less calm, more chaos, it's tiring. It's tiring for punters. It's tiring for fans. And, the comments from Michael Vaughan and from Jeffrey Boycott, although polarising, are to the mark. I mean, can you take a side seriously who don't want to hear about outsized criticism? They don't want to hear anything that isn't within their bubble. And I know Australia in recent years moved away from Langer and, his more autocratic style of management. A player renowned for his grit and obviously maligned for what happened at Headingley in 2019, but somebody who was probably harder than anybody that you saw on a test pitch, and as a coach followed that through. Obviously really funny moments when he kicked that bin over, but we moved past it. But what I'm trying to establish is that the regime changes, the Andrew McDonald side of the camp, which is it's not a hard-nosed approach. I think that England have just made the Australian approach look a lot more tough than actually it is, because ours is soft. I want the boys to understand that none of us in the crowd have a damn clue what we're doing. We're just trying to understand cricket as best we can. We've watched it for, in my case, 30 odd years, and we have a perception of kind of how it goes, and I like the idea you can challenge perceptions, and sometimes you challenge perceptions either way. It doesn't necessarily have to be going at 6 or 7 runs and over. It can just be an absolute jarring 42 runs off a session. So there's a crow doing an absolute business above me. Is that poetic or a metaphor for what I should be doing? But look, in fairness, people did watch because they could not watch. It was that sort of match, and I think that as we look towards what's going on in Canberra and the training sessions that England are putting on, I'm less enthused by the idea that we're not going to learn from our mistakes, and actually I'm more hopeful of the fact that whatever we do going into the second test, it's done in a way which the boys can be proud of and the people in the crowd can be proud of. Australia are in a place where, look, Cummins isn't named in their 14 players currently for Brisbane, but he's up there, he's bowling with a pink ball, and anybody would take him into their house. And I think that's where, when we talk about game changes, at the moment, Australia have a couple of aces up their sleeve, and when they play them, they'll play them in a way which we have to be prepared for. A blessing would be he's not ready to return, and despite losing Wood, I wouldn't have believed that we would have played Archer and Wood back-to-back tests anyway. Even with this long layoff, he's only 11 overs back into his rehab after his injury. So I was expecting at least Archer and Wood to be rested anyway. So if that does follow true and we do extrapolate to where we think it's going to be, I'm pretty confident the Australian attack, Australian line will look similar. Campbell Kellaway has just scored 80 in the Prime Minister's 11 game. Could I see him parachuted in for an injured Usman Khawaja? I could. I think that, at 38, and I'm a few years away from that, but I'm obviously far less athletic nor a professional sports person. But you have to start thinking of succession, and Australia, left the Warner and Khawaja bait way too late. And I think actually, do you try that during a series? It would be ballsy. But Travis Head, the innings of his life, he had the one in the World Cup, but do you leave him up there and let that momentum swing away? I don't think you do. So if they keep Khawaja, if he's fit, fine. If not, someone like Kellaway or McSweeney even coming in to partner with Weatherald, it'll be ballsy. But this Australian side seem to be ballsy. They seem to be catalysed by the chaos over the road, and I think that those sort of decisions are almost made easier when you don't need to validate a response. You just go, well, this is our response to Bazball, this is our response to what we saw in the first test. So look, if they go with the same team or they make the slight tweaks that I've mentioned, they're in a good place. They're in a really good place, and I think that England need to be prepared for that. They're not going to drop Crawley at this stage. If they wanted to, I think that their opportunity was to send him to Canberra, and it all rests on scores at Canberra. But you cannot quantify a net innings as anything other than a net innings. I think that's where, when we see how we line up, and if it is just a simple bowler change, I can't see Bashir coming into the side for a pink ball. Honestly, I couldn't see Nathan Lyon coming into the side. If they go with a 5-seam attack, it'll be bold, but you have got Head with some overs, and we have got Root with some overs, and we potentially that would be the avenue I could see it for. But for now, it's too early to say. There's lots more that can happen. But the core crux of all of it is that it's like that feeling when you're about 4 pints deep, and you're looking at your watch and you can't quite work out whether it's time to go home or it's time to go to the next pub. People out here, and the perception out here is people feel dazed and confused, and unlike Led Zeppelin, the melody isn't quite lining up, and I think that's where, if we see anything to change, it has to be done in a way where people start to become cognizant of what they're watching, and for both sides in that first test, Head's innings aside, it was a litany of how did that happen. And I should actually add, Stark's bowling innings was sublime. 7 in the first innings, 3 from the second innings, exactly what the doctor ordered without those his 2 quicks to support him. So yeah, it's I hope to seek comfort rather than discomfort, and I believe that both sides, Australia have lessons to learn as well. They got out of jail free with us going missing in that second bat innings and our bowling innings, but both sides will want to bounce back for different reasons. Both sides have an agenda to address, and I think both sets of fans have a moment to breathe in this time between the tests, and once we do get to Brisbane and how that sort of looks, I think we'll be better able to address a lot more about England's performance and Australia's performance for that matter. And it's an exciting time. Look, this is a tour which I've dreamt to do for 20 years of being a badger, and both sides know what rests on it. It's either an end of regime for the England side, or it's tabloid turmoil for the Australians. And I think that is, you can't say that from any other series. Like, the Bairstow Carey incident at Lord's last Ashes series, typified and it kind of set that series in motion. This series, is beyond motion. The commotion of the motion is really where we're at, and And I think actually what the series needs is to go back on the rails a bit better. And if that does happen for the second test, I think we've got a really, really interesting series, and one that I'm really excited to cover on behalf of Got the Runs. And with that, I've been Got the Runs, and you've been watching. Good night.